Hi, and welcome back to the Cobot channel. This week we're joined by Mike Wilson from the MTC. Hi, Mike.
Good morning.
Good morning. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and what the MTC do?
So I'm Chief Automation Officer at the MTC. The MTC is principally about helping industry adopt new technologies. So specifically in terms of robot automation, we do a number of things. Firstly, we're about positioning ourselves between the universities and industry so that we can help develop technologies that come out of universities, move them up the technology readiness levels to the point where industry can actually apply them. And also we feed the challenges that industry face back into the academics. So hopefully they're working on the right kind of research. We also do development work in our own right. So we develop solutions to challenges where they're not commercially available. So things that sit between what universities would do and what industry needs. And we're often developing robot automation solutions for those specific challenges and then feeding those into the supply chain. And we also provide advice to industry in terms of how to adopt automation. So people that have not done it before or they're uncertain as to how to move forward, we can provide that independent advice to support them and hopefully minimize the risk that they might be undertaking. And lastly, we work with the supply chain. So we're trying to help the supply chain in the UK become stronger so it can then deliver the solutions that industry needs.
Yeah. So we're all aware how the UK are lagging behind the use of robots compared to even other European countries in our adoption of robotics. What seems to be the biggest barrier to adoption that you've found so far?
I've often been asked that, Mark. It's not an easy question to answer. There are a number of different factors. Things like perceptions. There's a lot of industry that perceive that robots are more complicated than they are, more expensive than they are, and not appropriate to their own businesses. There are people that are applying, unfortunately, very short payback requirements, which does make it difficult to invest in capital equipment generally and robots as well. But I think one of the biggest ones actually is our culture. We almost have a sort of make, do and mend attitude still. I like to quote a report that the All-Party Parliamentary Manufacturing Group pulled together, I think it's about 8 years ago now, but they called the report Making Good, and they were looking at the culture of UK manufacturing. And I like to summarize that report in a couple of sentences. Basically, they concluded that in the UK, we're very proud that we keep all of our old machines running, whereas in Germany, they're very proud that they bought new ones. And I've said that to lots of conferences over the last sort of 6-7 years, and I always get nods and smiles, and nobody's really ever disagreed with me. So I think there's a lot of truth in that statement, and I think that's the thing that we have to address. We've got to change that culture so that we invest more in the equipment that we use within our manufacturing facilities.
I agree. Yeah, it's something we see every day in our working lives that, we're quite happy to carry on with a machine that might be 30 years old that puts an output that could be doubled now with a brand new machine, particularly in robotics as well. Yeah. So it's something that we are trying to work to address when we do line walks and audits, is to show people that there is something out there that can do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we actually were set up to do at Universal, we were sort of aimed at the SME market, and we're a nation of small companies. 99% of people are employed by SMEs, and for them to use robotics, it can make a big difference to their output, their complete operations. Have you seen this as well, that SMEs are more open to adopting this technology, and what sort of outputs can they see? What kind of transformations can they see?
I think it's a very mixed picture. You're certainly right. In the UK, that's one of the challenges we do have. Our manufacturing is largely made up from SMEs. And I do know a number of businesses that have very successfully applied robots, both industrial robots and collaborative robots. And we work with a number of those. So people like Contract Engineering down in the southeast, they're installing their third robot now. They're not a big company, they're a subcontract fabricator, but they've seen significant growth in their business as partly as a consequence of using robot automation. I came across a business a little while ago, Walsall Wheelbarrow, And they become one of my favourite stories, because they've been making wheelbarrows in the West Midlands since the Second World War. They've got 60% of the UK market for wheelbarrows, and they're making something like 3,000 wheelbarrows a week. And you think in this day and age we don't imagine that we make things like wheelbarrows anymore. We expect all of that to be coming in from the Far East, but no, they're very successful. And they started on their robot journey probably about 8 years ago now. They've got something like 20 robots in the factory and a workforce of about 20 people. So as many robots as people. They haven't made anybody redundant as a consequence of putting the robots in. They've just become more productive, more profitable, and it's allowed them to secure their position. So there are examples of SMEs out there that have done very well off the back of adopting robot automation, but there's still an awful lot who haven't even started yet. And I think they're still a little bit fearful of the technology, and that's the bit that we collectively as the industry need to address. We need to encourage more of these businesses to adopt robot automation and then to gain the benefits from it. And I think the situation is changing at the moment, in that we do face labour shortages, we do face skill shortages, and I think that's encouraging more businesses to now look at robots as a way of addressing those particular challenges. So it's not just an economic case anymore. It's also about, can we continue to make what we currently make? And I think that's encouraging more businesses to adopt more automation.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, when we look at other countries that have they've got much denser use of robots in manufacturing. Is there anything that we can learn from them, and how that knowledge can be shared with the UK manufacturers? I'm thinking of countries like South Korea, Japan, and Germany. Is there things that we can learn from their manufacturing methods that we can use to implement here?
I think it's a little bit difficult. You've got to be a little bit careful, but because a lot of UK manufacturing is about smaller batch, lower volume, higher value product, and I think that's been one of the reasons why we've been slower to adopt the technology. We don't have quite the same makeup of our manufacturing sector. But I think the other point is, and I think this is where we can learn, is we typically look very short term. And in Germany and South Korea and such like, they have a vision of the future. They know where they want to go, and it's not about a 1-year plan. This is more about thinking where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years. And I think if everybody could think more about where they want to be in the future, then I think we will change the mindset and we'll change the culture in the UK, and people will then be much more open to automation, thinking about longer term paybacks, because the equipment's, you know this as well as I do, Mark, the equipment's going to run for many, many years. There are robot systems that are out there that are 20 years old that are still running. They've paid for themselves many times over. And if we could just encourage more businesses to think longer term, I do think we could change that culture in the UK.
That's good. I mean, we do something in our presentations about a pathway, to have a forward work plan for companies to think about where they'll be in 5 years. And the vast majority, like you say, the small companies just don't think in those terms. Further than 12 months, they don't really see into the future. But when we've shown examples of financially where they would be if they adopted automation, they can actually see the real benefits, the tangible benefits in that. And that's a cultural thing, like you say. We need to promote that more and make sure people understand it. One of the things that we're particularly interested in is, obviously, we've seen a huge change in the robotics industry to include cobots, and we're seeing that cobots and humans working together to blend tasks together is starting to lead to greater productivity. Do you think that's going to increase in the future, and see companies see cobots more as a tool, or maybe even something parallel to the traditional stream of robotics?
I to be honest, I tend to think of cobots as just another form of industrial robot. So maybe that's not the right thing to say, but I don't like to differentiate too much, because they are slightly different animals, but they can be used in the same kind of situations. And it's about picking the right machine for the job is often the case. But I think you're right. I think the big step forward that cobots has actually made them much more much easier to apply, much easier to program and use. And I think that's removed a lot of the perceptions that industries had about robots being a difficult technology. So I think it's made it much more accessible for industry. I also think that the fact that you can install cobots onto a production line with minimal equipment around them also makes them easier then for particularly smaller businesses where they need flexibility. You can move the cobot from one application to another. It's not necessarily fixed in place on the factory floor in the same way that an industrial robot might be. So I think all of the flexibility that you get from that is also a big step forward. I think we're still quite a long way from truly kind of collaborative applications. I don't think there are many out there. I think we're using cobots alongside people doing slightly different tasks, but not necessarily working together. And I think we will move to that over time. But in all honesty, I think that could well be the larger industries that might do that first, because they tend to lead with the technology. But to be honest, I think there is so many opportunities just to perform relatively simple tasks, loading and unloading machines, picking and placing things on production lines. There's probably thousands of applications like that throughout UK manufacturing that we could automate today, that we don't need to worry too much about if you like, the challenges of the future and truly collaborative applications, because there's so much potential that we really ought to do now.
Yeah, we say that as well. It's the sort of thin edge of the wedge, if you like, that there are so many easier applications where cobots can be used to, like you say, tend machines or tend processes, that the sort of co-working end of it is very narrow at the moment, and the technology that makes that possible might not actually exist yet with regards to sort of collaborative scanners and so on that will fit around the robot. And like you say, there are still a lot of tasks where humans are adding real value to some manufacturing processes. That kind of leads me nicely onto the next question, really. So, like, when thinking about collaborative robots, what are the main factors that businesses should consider when implementing them into the factory? Is it culturally, or is it safety, or cost, or what are the main things that you think that businesses should consider?
Well, I think businesses really, some of it's cultural, because I think one of the key things to successful introduction of robots is involving the workforce, because you need to know what those guys are doing when they're performing a particular task if you want to successfully automate it. And I've been doing robots a very long time, and often the ones that have gone wrong is when the robots have been installed without really understanding what it is they really need to do. So getting the workforce involved, getting them part of the discussions and developing the solution with them is to my mind an enormous, well, a significant step that you need to take at the beginning. It's also then about finding a relatively easy application. I'm just going to re-emphasize something you said earlier, Mark. It's often businesses want to automate the biggest challenge they've got. And it's often the biggest challenge because it's difficult to do, and therefore it's going to be difficult to automate as well. And you have to recognize that there is a learning curve, as there is with any kind of new technology. And therefore you really want to start with something that's relatively simple, so that you can introduce a successful application, learn from that, and then move on to the more difficult applications later. So starting simple, I think, is also a key. And it may be that doesn't have the best return on investment, but that goes back to what we were saying about having a long-term vision. If you've got the vision, then you can start with the simpler things, accepting that maybe that one takes a little bit longer to pay back. It'll still be economic, but it may be a little bit longer, and then move on to the more complicated applications later. And I think that, if you like, is one of the keys to this, is having some form of strategy so that you know where it is you're trying to get to. Then identifying exactly what it is you actually want to do. And that's one of the challenges, is making sure that you can specify what it is you want the automation to actually deliver, how you want it to work, what the type of parts are that the robot's going to have to deal with. You can't assume that the supplier is going to be able to pick all that up, by visiting the factory. You need to put a piece of work in place to explain that. The automotive sector's been doing it for years. They're very good at it. Most SMEs are new to this and they're not very good at it. And that's where people like the MTC can help, because we can help them write those specifications so that when they go to the suppliers, they're correctly identifying what it is they actually want to buy, or the challenge that they want to be automated.
Yes, and it's clearly laid out then for everybody to understand. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And one of the things about using more robots for our long-term sort of future industrial strategy, do you think that would be really positive for the UK economy? Because we've heard a lot about reshoring, and I suppose if we can automate at the same rate as they are in Asia, then the big advantages that we've got is we don't have the logistics to bring things halfway around the world. So do you think there's a big opportunity for the UK economy to transform itself using robotics and automation?
Oh no, significant. That's one of my key points at the moment, really, is personally, I believe manufacturing is very important to the UK. I think it adds a lot of value to our economy as a whole. I think manufacturing's kind of been looked on as a second-class citizen for a number of years, but I do believe that's starting to change. And I'm a little bit old-fashioned, but I kind of believe that if you want to make money as a country, then fundamentally you've got to make stuff and sell it, and therefore we need manufacturing. And we need competitive manufacturing. That's also important. It's not just about having the ability to make things. You need to be able to make things that are competitive on a global market. So yes, using robots and automation is one of the key elements of achieving that, particularly in today's environment, because we do have a labour shortage, we do have skill shortages, and one of the ways that we can address some of those is by using many more robots in our factories. According to Make UK, there's something like 60,000 vacancies in manufacturing today. And if you can imagine, I haven't worked it out, but I'm sure if we had 60,000 more workers, whether they were robots or people, we'd be making much more stuff. We'd be selling more of it, and our manufacturing would be significantly bigger as a consequence. So there are significant opportunities with reshoring. Net zero is driving a change in our attitudes to where we make things. There is an opportunity to bring more of it back closer to the consumer. The consumers want smaller volumes of product, more customized to their particular needs. So again, you need to make them more locally rather than big volumes shipped halfway across the world. Our big challenge in the UK is to try and ensure that we make them in the UK. What we don't want is what's termed nearshoring. So it comes back to Europe, but it's made somewhere else on the continent rather than in the UK. We want to bring that production back here. And to do that, we need competitive manufacturing, and greater use of robots is a significant element of that.
I agree with that completely. I mean, we've seen that as well, where companies that have automated, they've sort of reduced their costs to the same as producing in the Far East. They can produce it here, particularly with things like electronics and pharmaceuticals, that we can produce mass on scale there and be competitive on the world market. And I think when lots of other businesses look at that and start to adopt those same techniques, they'll see that as well. I think it's a big thing, isn't it, that the current government talks about the productivity puzzle. There isn't a puzzle really. If you're making something and you can make it easier and cheaper by using a machine, you would do that. That's the whole point of the Industrial Revolution, isn't it? That's why we moved to that. So it is quite an interesting fact there. One question I wanted to ask you about: how do you think the increased use of AI will have an impact on the factory floor, and maybe even the use of cobots or robotics?
I think it will have I think it's having an impact now, but I think it's kind of largely hidden, and I think it will continue to be hidden. So AI is being built into robot systems, robot solutions to solve particular challenges, and also to make the systems easier to program, easier to operate, easier for the users. So I think we are seeing AI coming in, but I think, as I said, it's being hidden within the systems. The users don't even need to know it's there. So as an example, we did a piece of work recently where we were looking at the weight balances of strawberries in punnets. So you have to take strawberries out or put strawberries in to get the minimum weight that the punnet has to meet. And it's actually very difficult to do with robots because, well, partly because strawberries are very delicate, but
Yeah.
you also have to figure out where they are and which one you can take out, or if you're putting one back in, you've got to find the void in the punnet that you can put it in. You can't just squash it into the space. So we used AI within the vision system to help us solve those particular problems that the user doesn't even need to know it's there. It's performing a particular task, and I think we will see much more of that coming in. To give more capability to the robot systems with sensors and vision and such like, and B, to also make them much easier to program and much easier to use.
Yeah, to make the software much more like template driven or wizard driven, if you like, I suppose.
Yeah. So and I think, you know, it's a little bit like mobile phones. You know, you don't get a manual when you get a mobile phone. You're expected to be able to press buttons and figure it out, and that's where robots need to get to.
Yes, that's the sort of forward path we need to be on. And one other thing I want to ask you about is that we've seen a rise in the use of sort of mobile autonomous robots, where you've maybe got a robot arm on the back of an AGV, and they're starting to be used in industry. Do you see that as a growing trend? And are there any applications that you think might be particularly useful for using that technology?
No, it is a growing trend, and actually just mobile robots themselves is a growing trend, and I think we'll see a significant expansion of that in the short term. I know we've had it in logistics, but I think we're going to see much more on the factory floor. And ultimately, this is all about making our workforce more productive, using their skills and attributes where they add value. So anything where they're not adding value, then we should be automating it. So moving things around fundamentally should be automated. So I think we will see significant growth in mobile robots, and then we'll also then follow that with robot arms on mobile platforms. And I think you will see things like machine tending, for example, because you don't need the robot necessarily to be fixed in place in front of a machine all of the time. You could have that on a mobile platform tending 3 or 4 machines in exactly the same way that we do with people. So if you're not using the robot all the time in front of one particular task, then why not move it to other tasks? I think we'll see a lot of that type of thing within laboratories, for example, which I know is not manufacturing, but again, it makes sense that you, rather than using other devices or people to move things around within the laboratory, use a robot arm mounted on a mobile platform to do it, and then use the people that you've got, the technicians, where their skills are adding value to analyzing the results rather than just moving stuff around to perform the experiment. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunities that we will see coming in the future.
Yeah, we have a saying that let the robots take over the dull and let humans use their skill to the full. And that's basically it in a nutshell, isn't it? You want to get the best value out of people and take away those horrible tasks, those tedious tasks that you don't want them to do, really.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we touched upon is that one of the blockers or one of the challenges that people have got to adopt robotics is a skills shortage. And I spoke to Peter Williamson about this week. And do you think it's partly a responsibility of the industry, the robot manufacturers, to be able to provide some sort of free training, maybe like robot scholarships or free training to apprentices? Because those are the next generation of engineers that we're all going to need. And that's something we're really interested in. We're passionate about getting the next generation of engineers out there with the skills that are required. But do you think something along the same sort of lines?
I think the industry has a responsibility to try and figure out how to solve the problem. It's not necessarily about delivering the solution all the time, but addressing the challenge. I'm not sure it's as big as we think it is. I think there is a current challenge with the existing workforce because they've not been brought up with the technology. And I can't remember the exact number, but the average age of a worker in UK manufacturing is something like 50 plus. So you know, they've not been brought up with technology. The people that are coming in today, you know, I'll go back to when I was young. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have computers. We just weren't brought up with this kind of thing. Whereas the generation that's coming through now, that mobile phones and computers are normal, and therefore for them, I don't think robots are a challenge. And actually, I do think manufacturing needs to use more robots and more technology to attract these people. to come and work in manufacturing, because they don't want to work in the dirty, the dark kind of places that they envisage manufacturing to be, and it's not like that, and I know you know that. But they want to come in and work on technology. They want to use the kind of stuff that they've been brought up with. So manufacturing needs to be using that kind of equipment, that kind of technology, to attract these people to come and work there in the first place. I think the bigger challenge maybe is in terms of application. So knowing where to apply the robots, what can be done, what can't be done, and I think it's important that we get some of that content into things like the apprentice training, and I think the industry can provide that. So that's probably where we need to provide the greatest input, is to actually helping the educators understand what's required and giving them the case studies or the support to deliver those kind of messages.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that completely. I mean, we work quite closely with the college network for helping people provide those skills. And it's actually, I was going to ask you about this as well, is that as an opportunity for a young person to go into engineering, there could be a new classification of job, which is a robotics engineer. Typically, you may have gone to university, but now there's maybe like an apprenticeship for robotics engineer that can take over more simplified robotics like cobots and being able to implement them. And do you think that's going to drive a new sector of employment, perhaps?
Yeah, and certainly, because it's also more attractive, it's more exciting, and there are things like schools robot competitions that are generating a lot of interest within the schools. And I should stress that they're very diverse. The participation is about 50-50 girls and boys, and we need more girls to be coming through as engineers. So I'm very keen to expand on that and build on it. We do have apprenticeships now. So there's recently launched a level 6 apprenticeship, which I know is degree level, and a level 7, which I know is higher education level, but they are robotics engineer apprenticeships. There are more general apprenticeships that have robot engineering content. So MTC, for example, does a level 4 automation apprenticeship, which has a significant robot content. There are other places doing similar things. So we're starting to get there. I don't think we've solved all of the problems yet, but we are starting to have more content, robotics content within the apprenticeships. And I think you're right. If people change job titles and we do create new job titles, it's more likely to attract people into manufacturing, and it'll be more exciting for them. And I know when people talk about technology, all the job titles that we've currently had, when they look at the future, they generally predict that all of those old job titles will be gone and they'll all be replaced by newer job titles. And it's happened in our lifetime in other sectors. I'm sure it's going to happen within manufacturing.
Definitely. I was going to ask you one last question. Are there any particular cobot applications that you've seen that have been really interesting, maybe like novel uses of cobots in manufacturing?
I must admit, I don't tend to focus on the novel ones. And I know that's maybe a bit of a cop-out in terms of an answer, but the thing that excites me is just seeing people loading machine tools, doing some of the more basic things. I think I get more interested when I go into companies where you wouldn't expect to see robots and they're successfully doing it. So I go back to my examples of the subcontract fabricator, contract engineering. He has industrial robots and cobots. And I look at that and I think, well, he's a very small business. He's not got guaranteed work going through because he's a subcontractor, and as a consequence, he's taking some risks, but he's figured out that the robot is the right way forward, and it helps him sell more work. That's one of the keys to it. It's a plus for him. When he brings his visitors round, he shows them the equipment he's going to use to make the parts that they might be placing with him, and it gives him a competitive edge. It's the same with the wheelbarrow guys. They bring their customers round and they're blown away by the manufacturing facility, not because it's the prettiest in the world, it's some industrial units in Wolverhampton, but because within those units they've got advanced manufacturing technology, and it just gives them a competitive edge. And to me, that's what excites me is those kind of more normal businesses, if you like, that are using the technology and getting real benefit from it.
Yeah, we see something similar. There's a company down in rural Lincolnshire that makes garden furniture. There's only 10 people, and they've now got 7 robots in their manufacturing facility. And they had to do that to fill a labour gap. They just couldn't recruit people. So it's proved their business to be more sustainable because of it. And like you say, it means that they can win more work and turn out work with better quality. So yeah, it's one of those kind of tasks that people can identify with. It's sanding, screwdriving, dispensing glue, that sort of things that nobody wants to do. You can
Yeah.
automate it and let your staff really concentrate on what they're really good at, the skilled side of things, of assembly and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite an interesting way of using robotics into companies that size, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and if we could just encourage many more of them to do something similar, you just imagine how we could transform UK manufacturing.
It's a positive thing for the future, that it really is. Mike, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. That's been fantastic to gain your insight into what we've discussed. That's all from the Cobot channel this week. Join us again soon when we'll have another thought leader from the world of robotics, and we'll see you soon.